Welcome to Working with Chops. Chops are channel operators, and they're used to manipulate channels. In TouchDesigner, a channel is a sequence of numbers. In some cases, that's only a single value, but it can also represent a list of values. Let's take a look at what that means. Let's begin by opening up the OpCreate dialog and adding a constant chop here into our network. Our constant chop by default only holds one sample, and we can see here when we manipulate the value parameter that just this single value changes. Let's convert this to a DAT so we can see this in a different way. I'm going to right click on the output of our constant chop, select DAT, and then next select chop2 to convert this to a table. Here we can see this single value as represented as just one row inside of our table. Let's add another channel operator to our network. Let's open up the OpCreate dialog. I'm going to use the tab key to move back around to channel operators, and I'm going to add a pattern chop here into my network. Next, let's change the number of samples or the length parameter down to just 50. And now let's get a little closer into our network, make our pattern chop viewer active, right click inside of the viewer and select dots per sample. Now what we see is a dot for every sample that's inside of this channel. Let's go ahead and turn off the viewer active flag, and let's convert our pattern chop to DATs. I'm going to select DATs from the OpCreate dialog, and next I'm going to select chop2. Here I can see a row for every sample that's inside of my channel. So we can think of a single dot corresponding to a single row inside of our chop2. Let's take a look at one more example. Let's add a mouse in chop. The mouse in chop is going to let us see the position of our mouse on screen. Next, let's connect this to a trail chop. Our trail chop holds a history of what's happened inside of our chop channels. And here we can see a graph of these two values together. Now, in this view, we can see the X position in the first channel and the Y position inside of the second channel. Let's go ahead and turn down the length of this to just 1 second. Let's go ahead and make our trail viewer active and select dots per sample. Here we have another way to see the history of where our mouse has been on screen. That's great, but let's actually take a look at another way we might use chops. This time let's add a timer chop here into our network. Our timer is useful for all sorts of operations, but let's try to create a little countdown timer that we might display on screen. To do this, we need to get a little more information out of our timer. So let's right click on the output of our timer chop, head over to the DAT family and select info. Let's add that info table into our network. Next, let's hit the tab key and hit tab again to move over to texture operators. Let's add a text top into our network. What we'd like to do is we'd like to display the text information here from our table inside of our text top. With our text top selected, let's clear out the text parameter. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete all the text inside of that parameter. Next, I'm going to click and drag the info table right into the DAT parameter. This is going to allow me to select a row and column whose data is going to be displayed inside of the text top. Now, I want to keep the row 0 for my DAT over here, so row 0, but I want to select column 2. So let's go ahead and select column 2. Next, let's head back to our timer. Let's go ahead and change the length down to say just 5 seconds. Let's reinitialize our timer and then hit start. We now have a countdown timer that goes from 5 seconds all the way down to 0 seconds. Let's do one other operation. Let's right click on the output of our timer, add a select chop to our network, and our channels, let's select just done. Next, let's go ahead and right click on the output of our select chop, add a math chop to our network. And in our math chop, let's change our range of 0 to 1 to be 1 to 0. What this is going to allow us to do is to think about how we can use this information about our channel being done, our timer being done, to change what we might do with our text top. Finally, let's end our chain of operators here with a null chop. Finally, I'm going to grab my text top, bring it over here. I'm going to make my null viewer active. I'm going to click and hold on the done channel and drag it up to my text top. I'm going to come over to the font page and then over to the color page, and I'm going to drag this parameter right onto font alpha and select chop reference. Let's go ahead and start our timer. When we start our timer, we can see that the alpha, or the value for done, has been inverted. So it's 1 while the timer is running. And when we get to 0, it turns off. Hopefully this gives you some ideas about the different ways that you might think about working with channel information and data, and how we might use chops inside of our networks.